Yo, what is going on? PartTimerZack here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the anime Fire Force. We're going to be giving my initial impressions as well as my impressions now, as well as a quick rundown of what the show's about. So if you enjoy the video in any way, make sure to give it a thumbs up. That lets me know that you're enjoying the video, and it also lets YouTube push it out to more people. And so anyway, let's go ahead and jump into it. So you're probably wondering what the show is about. It's about 8 stations of firefighter squads that essentially take on things called infernals. The one that we really dive into is the 8th station, and the one that our main protagonist is in. So what the infernals are, for anybody who's wondering, is led to believe at the beginning of the show that it's spontaneous. It's something that just randomly happens where a human combusts into this infernal, which is like a hybrid mindless type fire monster thing that has no thought. It just causes mayhem around the world. It's the firefighters' job to essentially take these guys out. So there are normal firefighters in the show. This is like a special force, essentially, is what you'd think of it as, and it's their job to maintain the fires that the infernals have, as well as take them out. It does get kind of religious a little bit when putting people down and stuff like that. It kind of goes into like a different thing where it's like peaceful, and they're trying to put everybody down in a peaceful manner. They don't just willy-nilly go around shooting things. As you progress into the season, you kind of understand that it's not always randomly combusted. There are a group of people that are seemingly making this happen, and so it's mainly the first season about finding out who is really doing this in terms of the actual human-made or man-made combustion and finding a way to stop them. So let's dive into my review of the release. When it first came out, I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't really like the characters. Something just kind of seemed off about the show. I'm not really sure what it was. Maybe it was the pacing, maybe it was the characters, but however, I did like the powers. That hasn't really changed. I like the pyrokinetics. I like how each generation it seems to be different. I also like the main character's powers. At first I didn't really like it, but it does really start to show off what he can and can't do with the powers as it progresses, and the fights are really cool. But we'll get into it here in a minute. And I did like the idea here of the firefighters being like these heroes. I know like in the real world, firefighters are sometimes considered, you know, heroes, especially to myself and stuff. I really think that they don't get enough, you know, recognition for stuff like that. So it was really cool to see an anime that was really focused on what I would consider like powerless heroes, and giving them powers and giving them an ability to actually do something really cool and show off what it really takes to be a firefighter. I know it's about, you know, infernals, monsters and stuff like that, but I think the premise behind it is, you know, it's just giving firefighters a limelight or whatever to show off that they're actually heroes. Now, I wanted to give my impressions now that I've actually watched in the last week. I actually binge watched the first season. I haven't gotten into the second season yet, so I'm hoping to do that here in the next couple weeks, but I really enjoy the fights. Now, it gets into a lot of fights kind of at the beginning when I first watched, but it wasn't as cool as the ones at towards the end of the season. It really, the pacing starts to pick up quite a bit. It does skip, not really skip around, but it's more in my favor of pacing, where it's like it talks about backstory, but it doesn't spend a whole episode talking about backstory. You know, you get a gist of why these two characters don't like each other, why they like each other, why they formed a bond, and then it moves on. It doesn't spend the whole episode talking about, oh, this guy loved this guy and this girl loved that. Like, you know what I mean? Some people like that. Some people like to really dive into the characters and really understand why the bonds are connected. But I think this show does a really good job of kind of giving you action while giving you a reason why somebody's mad about something or they don't like a certain person, and it really gives you a connection without having to spend too much time on that. And it really does get into the fights and how certain things are used. One thing I want to dive into is the pyrokinetics. So each character essentially gets a different version of it, or a kind of way that they can use it. I guess I wouldn't say it's a version, but each person uses it in a different way, which I find is really cool, because it's not just okay, everybody has fire powers and they kind of just do whatever. It's like each character kind of has a little bit of a different backstory why they use it. Some are actually powerless, like the captain of the 8th there actually doesn't have powers, and he's a captain, and he's actually really cool. He's a badass essentially, and it's kind of cool as you learn that he doesn't have powers and what he does and why he's the captain and stuff like that. It really dives into the character development without touching too much on it and not getting too far away from the action, and then the pacing really speeds up at the end. One thing I really want to talk about was the characters. So the characters at first seem kind of off to me. The main character smiles when he's stressed or scared, so it's kind of like his weird dynamic, I would say. Whenever he's like getting yelled at or he's in a situation that makes him feel uneasy, he's smiling, which kind of makes me feel weird, because it's like, as a human, I'm like, that's not the appropriate emotion. But as you kind of go into it, you kind of get this, like, I don't know, almost you're used to it, or it becomes understandable or whatever, and it more or less just kind of resonates with somebody feeling like a little bit anxious, a little bit weird in a situation. So I kind of resonate there, as well as the characters overall. I feel like each character kind of has their own like limelight and the reason that they're special to the force and why they actually, you know, make a part of the anime. Even people who are not part of the force, that are part of different stations, are actually, I don't know, they have some character to them. They have a reason why they're doing the things they do. They have their own little backstory, like I said, that talks about it for a little bit, and you start to kind of like all the characters. I haven't really found a character I don't like. Maybe the chick that goes naked randomly. I don't really care for her, I guess, because she's kind of annoying. I also like the idea of the Infernals. I think it's a really cool idea to, I guess, do something for firefighters and do something in the sense of like why the fires are happening. And it's not just some like, oh, we'll fire some person left the pot on or whatever. It's like this guy turned into a monster, a flaming monster. And now we have to go kill him. And now we have to do all this stuff. And it dives into Infernals because there's like, I would say 2 different types from what I've seen so far. There's like an Infernal that's mindless and doesn't really understand things. And then there's like the demon Infernals, without diving too much into it, because I don't want to do spoilers, but essentially they're still a little bit mindless because their whole objective is to like destroy, but they're a little bit stronger and they have way more control over the pyrokinetics that they use and whatnot. So it becomes these really, really cool fights, and you start to see different sides of different stories. I also think it's funny and enjoyable to watch. There are moments that like are in the middle of a serious fight. You kind of have a character that's like a comic relief, which is kind of weird, but I actually think it kind of works with the kind of style that the anime is trying to portray. It wants you to be serious and it wants you to understand certain things, but at the same time I feel like it's supposed to be somewhat of a goofy type of thing. Without trying to spoil it too much, there's this character named Arthur. He's like one of my favorite, and essentially his whole premise is that he's a knight, and the more he looks like a knight, the stronger he is. And there's a part in the episode which I won't, you know, spoil or anything, but essentially he's dressed up in this knight and he feels like a knight and he's like the strongest he's ever been, and then it proves that he's actually dressed up in some weird attire and it's all in his head that he's a knight, and then he becomes one of the weakest characters and gets his butt kicked. It's just really funny to see like how the power scaling, it's really making fun of some of that stuff. So the last part here is my overall thoughts. So the show is worth watching in my opinion. I know that people get a bad rep for it, or they just kind of don't like it, they kind of brush it off, which is something I did when it first released. However, I do really think it needs to be given a chance, especially at least watching the first episode. I really think that, I don't know, it's something fun. It's fun after like maybe mid-season, you start to kind of get into the characters, you start to like it a little bit. The powers are cool, the fights are cool, like I said. Maybe it's just the fact that I gave it another chance that I think so strongly of it all of a sudden, but I really think it's worth a shot. The characters also get better along the way. At first they're a little, I don't know, cringy, I guess you could say, or a little off-putting, but as you kind of grow into it, you kind of understand why they're the way they are, and some of the stuff just becomes goofy and really funny and entertaining to watch. The powers are dope, and so are the fights. Like I said, the fact that each person has a different power and the way they use their power, and it never really seems boring whenever you're watching a fight because they use it in different ways. So that was just a quick rundown of my review of my overall impressions of the first season of Fire Force. I hope to make another one around the second season, depending on how well this video does and how well, you know, the progress goes in watching the second season, obviously. So anyway, guys, have a good rest of your night. Peace.